Hey guys, this is Sean S here, and I just want to tell you in advance that this is the first video in a long time that I didn't get my script checked for. However, I'm recording my lines in doing this video as a test to see if people around me would be interested in checking the scripts for my episodes in this series, since I already have 4 scripts ready to go. One for Teacher's Pet, one for Thundercat's Roar, and one for Ollie's Pack. I decided to start with Nightmare Ned because this review is one where, spoiler alert, I'll just say that I don't dislike this show at all, and with the exception of Teacher's Pet, my reviews that I plan on doing for both Thundercat's Roar and Ollie's Pack, let's just say that I don't like those shows a single bit. I was going to review Thundercat's Roar first, however, thinking about it much more, with the fact that I both added more to the script in early March to now, and only one person, that person being Paradox Philosopher, checked the script, I'm going to wait until I get more people to check that script before I do that review, along with the Ollie's Pack review. Until more people decide to look at the script, but that's if anybody around me even watched those 2 shows, so that's why I'm starting off this series with Nightmare Ned, since it's an obscure show that nobody has heard of. And it's a show that I can easily review without needing to have someone proofread, and it's a show that I do have good things to say about. With that being said, without dragging this out much longer, let's begin. So, has anybody ever heard of this show before? No? Well, this is probably your first time hearing about this one. To give you guys a bit of a backstory for this one, Nightmare Ned is based on a Windows PC game about a 10-year-old kid named Ned, who was home by himself after he got home from school. For the majority of his time home, he was eating junk food and playing video games until the power gets knocked out, and for the rest of the game, Ned would go from dream to dream, facing his nightmares until he would eventually wake up. I'm not going to describe the rest of the game, since I haven't played it, and the only thing I decided to watch from the game, from what I can recall, are the cutscenes. And besides, we're not talking about the video game, at least today. Instead, I'm talking about the animated series, which I'm having a hard time determining if the show came out before the game. I don't know. And if anybody is wondering, yes, I'm going to count this show as being part of Disney's portfolio of animated shows, in the same category as Disney's other cartoon shows that they aired at this time, like Disney's Doug, Recess, Pepper Ann, their other cartoons based on animated movies, among other shows. Considering the fact that this show is based on a Disney game developed for computers, and one of the production logos at this show's end credits was also used in the 101 Dalmatians series. Side note, this production logo was also used at Quack Pack in the Hercules animated series' end credits. So yeah, I do count this as a Disney animated series. So getting back to the subject of Nightmare Ned, the TV show, I'm just going to start off this review by saying this now. Out of every single cartoon show that Disney put out over the past 36 years that they've been putting out cartoon shows, this was the one that I think that Disney treated the worst out of all of them, in my opinion. If you guys thought that Disney's treatment towards their other shows that are often considered underrated, like Teacher's Pet, Dave the Barbarian, and Wander Over Yonder were bad, just wait till you see how badly Disney treated this show. Sure, well, those other shows that I previously gave examples with weren't treated good either, with one of them only lasting 2 seasons, where one half of Season 2 was split into Season 2A, and the other half was split into Season 2B due to the show moving networks, one lasting a really short 20 episodes, and the last one was given such a short lifespan of only 2 seasons with not even 3 years on its belt, not to mention either that the show was announced to end not too long after Gravity Falls ended. However, they were at least given a chance by Disney. They probably just ended because of the fact that they moved networks, thus causing low ratings, or just simply network politics. With Nightmare Ned, on the other hand, it premiered on April 19th, 1997, and was quickly canned and removed from television 4 months later, for the fact that parents complained about the dark contents that the show had, and that the show went over budget. That on its own wouldn't have been much of an issue if Disney at least gave this show reruns, because despite the fact that some of Disney's lesser or weaker shows like The Wuzzles or even Schnookums and Meat only lasted 13 episodes, Disney still gave those 2 shows reruns on Toon Disney. This show, on the other hand, has never gotten any reruns of any kind on the other channels owned by Disney at all. Not even as a Halloween event where the airing this show would be right for the season. After 1997, Disney rarely mentioned the show at all. The only other time that this show was mentioned in anything Disney related was from a TV advert from 1998. And I don't even think that this was even from America, since Disney Channel was extremely different than this version of Disney Channel in 1998. Making matters worse, because this show didn't get any reruns, and because the show wasn't released on DVD or VHS, the show was considered lost for a good long while, until as far as 2019. And at that point, I actually had no idea that the rest of the series was found. Last time I checked in 2017, the majority of the episodes were found except for 4 11-minute episodes that weren't found until 2 years later. Oh wow, this show must have been really horrific if Disney was so desperate to hide the show from the world and never mention it again. So back in 2017, I gave all the episodes that I could watch a look, and is this show so horrendously horrifying that the show deserved what it got? Actually, no. This show is actually really good and really entertaining. Actually, not only do I think that this show is really good and entertaining, I think that this show is really great and entertaining. Before I start getting into what I think are the qualities that makes this show great in my opinion, what's the concept? This show revolves around Ned, the same main character from the game. Instead of Ned trying to face his fears and defeating shadow creatures to wake up, this series is an episodic series where Ned faces something that activates one of his fears or anxieties. It goes into a dream sequence where one of his anxieties or fears is haunting him through a nightmare, and after his nightmare ends, he basically turns around to fix what would have been a reality. Think of this show as a precursor to Phineas and Ferb, only with a dark and creepy tone. Ironically, something similar that Phineas and Ferb would do that occurs in this show is that there can be episodes in this series that could subvert your expectations, like in the episodes Headless Lester or Abduction, where you'll expect that they're going to end with Ned waking up from his nightmare, but then the episodes completely subverted things that it would make you wonder about many things. Of course, I'm not going to ask about these questions since they'll be going into spoiler territory, and with the show's obscurity, not too many people even seen this show, and I think these endings you need to see to believe. Speaking of being a precursor to something, there's actually a fun fact that I think you should know about this show. While I was initially watching the episodes of this show back in 2017 on my first viewing, there's actually something that I realized. This show is very similar to Courage the Cowardly Dog, in how the show revolves around a character that either has to save his owners/parents from something bad, or faces fears in a nightmare. The only differences being that Ned is a kid and not a dog, Ned's parents are much younger than Courage's owners, and Nightmare Ned has the scary moments take place in a nightmare away from reality, whereas in Courage, the scary moments in that show actually did take place in the show's universe. Now, I'm not saying that Courage flat out ripped off this show. I'm just saying that it's actually coincidental how similar these two shows are. And in all honesty, these two shows make for a good comparison piece for which one is better or worse than the other. I'll say now that I think that Courage is a little better than this show, considering that Courage can be more heartwarming, hilarious, and dark. Nightmare Ned is a lot more tame. Considering the fact that most of the nightmares are played more wacky and cartoony, not to mention either that it falls more into those relatable things that kids go through in life than just being scary. I'm not saying that the show didn't have its share of dark moments, and I'll get to those episodes in a little bit. This show mostly falls into more of the spoopy category, where it's dark with a more abstract sense of humor and style. That's another thing that I like about this show. Its entertainment value knows no bounds. Every single time I watched an episode or rewatched one, I couldn't help but to watch the episode the whole way through, because this show always keeps my attention. Every second of each episode kept me intrigued because it never got boring, due to the loads of creativity and absurdness of Ned's nightmares, and the fact that the show keeps you at the edge of your seat in every episode. During my first watch through of every episode of the series, I would be wondering to myself a lot of things like, is Ned going to make it out of this situation alright? Or what are Ned's parents going to think when they find out about what he did? Another thing that works in this show's favor is that it knows how to keep your attention the correct way. It's not like in certain other cartoon shows or movies where they would try to keep your attention by playing a bunch of sound effects and constantly having the characters talk for long periods of time just to keep your attention, when in actuality it would probably give the audience members a headache because it never takes a break. The nitwitting from SpongeBob. Nightmare Ned knows how to use this sparingly instead of doing the equivalent of waving keys in front of your face. This show does also have moments where it's quiet to give us a break from all the insanity that would happen after one of the dreams. And unlike something like The Good Dinosaur or White Fang, when this show does have moments where it's silent, it doesn't go on for too long to the point where it becomes boring. The show holds on to it for just the right time to calm the episodes down a little bit. Take for instance in the episode Girl Trouble, where in the episode, after Ned realizes that he has power over Conrad and Vernon, he goes into a power mad state where he says that he'll be able to take over the world with his power, which leads to him waking up. He has a monologue about how he had the strangest dream, and for the remaining seconds of the episode, we don't get any dialogue, and instead, they let the animation and what Ned does explain for us how Ned is feeling. The same thing can also apply to the ending of the accordion lesson. Speaking of what's going on screen doing all the talking, let's move on to the animation. So far, I've been talking about this series and how unappreciated I think it is, since the show aired for only 4 months, and spoilers, I think the show is very underrated. And one of the aspects that is underrated about the show is its animation. The animation in the show has a very creepy and Beetlejuice look to it when the show goes into Ned's nightmares, while on the other hand, for what the show interprets as normal is very simplistic, and the character designs are also simplistic. I don't mind it that much. Every one of the designs look like what they should look like, and the designs were built from the ground up, rather than simplifying characters from another show that we already know and was established, or not looking like what they're supposed to, unlike Breadwinners, where the main characters didn't look like ducks, but instead like frogs or geometric shapes. and Thundercats Roar, where the main characters looked more like human or troll designs colored in face paint than cats, and that show oversimplified characters that we were already familiar with. And besides, I think that the simple character designs work in this show's favor, since the human designs need to have a contrast to the characters in Ned's nightmares, which, when we get to that aspect, are where the character designs become much more detailed. Like the robot version of Ned from Robot Ned, Ned's monster form from Monster Ned, the ants from, well, the ants, that green antagonist from Along for the Ride, etc. Let's finish off my discussion about the animation by addressing the big elephant in the room. This show, kind of like Doug, two shows from the early 2000s, and Big City Greens, have the human characters with multicolor skin aesthetic. This aspect has been throwing off cartoon critics for years with comments like, "Why do the characters look like that?" And normally I would be asking this question if the show doesn't fit with this aesthetic, or I find it flawed. In Nightmare Ned's case, I think that this aspect fits with the tone that it's going for more than from what I've heard with when Doug and the Cramp Twins use this aesthetic. Since this show doesn't go for the slice of life approach, okay, in some aspects it does have the slice of life feeling since Ned goes through what kids usually go through, but when the show mostly goes into nightmares, it helps the multicolor characters fit in since the show's nightmares can get very surreal. Such as in the episodes Ned's Life as a Dog, Dapper Dan the Ant's Magic Bus, Tooth or Consequences, Show Me the Infidel, Willie Trout, House of Games, Canadian Bacon, Abduction, Testing, The Accordion Lesson, Steamed Vegetables, Along for the Ride, and The Dentist. This aesthetic actually fits the tone of this show just as much as another Disney show that I'll talk about another time, and ironically enough, that particular series is also obscure and uses the same multicolored skin aesthetic. Now let's get into the thing that you've probably been waiting for. At the beginning of the video, I said that I was going to be mentioning episodes of this show that I thought were the scariest out of the entire series. And keep in mind, just because I said that these episodes were the scariest, that doesn't mean that they're bad episodes. I'm just mentioning which ones were the less tame of the entire series. I think that the scariest episode out of all of them is Until Undeath Do Us Part. In this episode, Ned goes to the movie theater to see a zombie movie. That plan is ultimately out of the window when Joni, Ned's crush, basically follows him to the movie theater and basically annoys him while he's trying to watch the film. He basically gives her something so she'll leave him alone. She basically talks about how she wants to marry Ned until it goes into a dream sequence where Ned accidentally marries a zombie. Why is this episode so disturbing, you might ask? Well, I'll start explaining this right now. This may seem like an episode that involves the normal setup with Ned's anxieties clouding up his dreams where he doesn't want to get married. However, the true reason why this episode is disturbing comes from the zombie designs themselves, especially the one zombie that Ned supposedly married. All of the zombie designs that were made specifically for this episode have an extreme level of detail to them that makes them look uncanny. Whether if it's their eyes, which are either empty sockets, or the eyes in general that don't even have a pupil. Even some of the music tracks in this episode are disturbing, especially in the one scene where Ned was running away from the zombie that he accidentally proposed to. Other disturbing episodes are thrown into this category for smaller reasons. Headless Lester, an episode about Ned not believing the camp counselor's story about Headless Lester until a nightmare comes up where Ned faces him and loses, is in the disturbing category because of the ending where Ned is tied onto wood and is heading towards a buzzsaw. The scene ends with him being cut in half off screen. I'm still not revealing its ending, which I didn't see coming though. And lastly, Canadian Bacon, an episode about Ned sneaking home a pet pig, only to be told that Canadian bacon, his favorite food, is made from pig, which leads him to dreaming about the tables being turned on him. This one, I decided to throw into the disturbing category because cannibalism. So, between all three of these episodes, how do they compare to certain episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog and Invader Zim? Well, the only episode that I can say competes for disturbing in the veins of those two is Until Undeath Do Us Part. And even then, that episode still falls short, while the other two don't even hold a candle to what Heads of Beef from Courage or Dark Harvest from Zim did. Although, with every exaggerated or horrifying episode that comes out, there's also points where the show can get very wholesome and gives a nice feeling. As I said in the beginning, Courage can be a lot more sad and heartwarming than the show, but that doesn't mean that this show can't have its moments where it can become heartwarming. Because yeah, in one episode, it shows the bond that Ned could have had with his parents if the show lasted much longer. In the episode The Accordion Lesson, Ned has a dream where he's hypnotized by his accordion teacher by being dressed like a monkey side act for her show. Ned's mom eventually finds out that the monkey is actually him and puts a stop to what this accordion teacher was doing. And the episode ends with Ned and his mom performing together after Ned wakes up from his dream. Speaking of that, if the series lasted much longer, we could have really seen more from the perspective of Ned's parents, including his mother and his father. Sure, we did get to see the father and son relationship between Ned and his dad, including in the episodes The Ants and Willie Trout, but one of them was all in a dream, and most of the episode was about how massive the ant colony is, while the other was about fishing, where Ned and his family look for a fish by the name of Willie Trout, all while Ned dreams that his family are pirates looking for a fish that swallowed Ned's father's head. While Ned's mom only had this episode where she plays a starring role. That leads into the characters. I didn't mind that most of the characters weren't very fleshed out since the show is episodic, and the show is a lot more focused on Ned. When you look at it more critically, though, the show's characters could be a little more fleshed out. However, the show was canceled a little too soon to flesh out more of its characters. So for my discussion about the characters, the only one that really does matter is the main character, Ned. And that's not much of a problem in my book because the main character is actually very likable. I mean, sure, he does have his moments where he can blow up out of nowhere, act a little selfishly, has a sarcastic manner when talking about something, becomes very impatient when someone would say something not true or if he's annoyed, and certain other things that I could talk all day about, but Ned is a kid after all. Not only that, but a kid with anxieties. So Ned is going to do some of the things that he did in this series, and besides all the things that I mentioned that are faults that many kids go through, Ned is actually a very likable character. They made him a kid that gets along with his teachers, and when he became a teenager in one episode, nice to his parents. However, at the same time, I really like how they made Ned to where he's not just a Mary Sue or Gary Stu. Ned has plenty of flaws. He has a mountain of anxiety, as I said. He's often made fun of at school for falling for Conrad and Vernon's pranks when they replaced Ned's Sloppy Joe with dog food in Ned's Life as a Dog, and when they changed the labels of the boy and girl bathroom in Girl Trouble. He can misunderstand what his mom and dad say to him, like in Canadian Bacon. He can be very forgetful, such as in Dapper Dan, where he forgets that one of his toys was in the middle of the floor. He accidentally broke one of his cousin's dolls in a doll's house. He tore apart his report card, even though it's not actually his report card in Bad Report Card, and the list goes on. In terms of Disney shows, would I say that this show is my favorite show from Disney? No. I can think of at least 2 other shows from Disney that I gave a higher score than this show, but in terms of shows that I threw into the great category, I still need to think of somewhere to place this show next to other shows. And bear in mind, I haven't seen every show from the company, so this show is probably going to have some competition. Although, even though I don't think that this is my favorite cartoon show from Disney, I will say that I do think that it's one of their most underrated shows, along with another series that I'm also planning a review for, but that's another series entirely. Do I recommend this show? Absolutely. If you are a fan of shows like Real Monsters, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Invader Zim, or The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, then I do absolutely recommend this one. Even as a show that you can sit back and enjoy, you won't like it as much as those other shows, at least not as much as Courage or Zim, since, as I said, this show is a little more tame in the scare department. If you are afraid that the series would be too long and you don't want to watch through a long series, then you are absolutely lucky. The show only lasted for 12 episodes anyway, and each episode segment, except for The Dentist and the Ballad of Conrad and Vernon, are all 11 minutes, while the last 2 segments are 6 or 7 minutes. Although, bear in mind, guys, the quality on some of the episodes that you've seen pictures of in this review are not the greatest, and the quality of the recordings depends on the particular episodes. Willie Trout was recorded by camera and is the only episode at this point that hasn't been found on VHS by anybody else. Truth or Consequences has the beginning portions cut completely, with the only surviving recording of the beginning parts being a recording by the same guy who recorded Willie Trout on camera. Magic Bus, Until Undeath Do Us Part, Lucky Abe, The Dentist, and the Ballad of Conrad and Vernon has this white static on the recording, while the audio is crystal clear. The quality on each episode won't matter too much, as long as you're able to watch the episodes and hear what's going on. And besides, unlike with some particular YouTube videos, there isn't any background noise to distract from the camera-recorded episode. With other shows that have disappeared from the stands of time, like the Little Shop cartoon or Schnookums and Meat, I can understand why those 2 shows had episodes that disappeared from the earth for a while, since those 2 shows were considered embarrassments that tried to follow trends and missed the points of things that they're either adapting or ripping off. But with something like Nightmare Ned, a show that did nothing wrong other than spooky and scary themed plots, the way that this show was treated and how Disney completely abandoned this show after it was done was kind of unfair to do to this show. Sure, Disney's cartoon shows were seen more as clean in comparison to what Nick and Cartoon Network did at the time, but Disney has been doing a lot of dark content since their beginnings, and even by Disney TV show standards, Nightmare Ned isn't even the darkest thing that they've ever released. Gargoyles came out 2 or 3 years prior, and from what I've heard, tackled really heavy topics, and Gravity Falls had episodes like The Inconveniencing, Into the Bunker, Susan the Real Girl, Northwest Mansion Mystery, and Weirdmageddon 3 Take Back the Falls. That involved characters being possessed, stalked, mounted animals bleeding, shape-shifting into horrifying things, or even having one character literally saying corpses. Yeah, Gravity Falls has its moments of comedy, but then again, so does Nightmare Ned. This is a series that I would definitely like to see a comeback for. However, if there's one suggestion that I think should be made for this show, I think that this show should have a TV PG rating rather than a Y7 rating. Since the show was rumored to have gotten canceled because of the fact that parents complained about the show's disturbing content, so a PG rating is best suited so kids will be aware that the show will at least have parental guidance. Although, I don't really blame this show for the Y7 rating, since the original Teen Titans also got a Y7 rating when it went into dark topics, while Teen Titans Go got a PG rating when that show is far less mature than the original and its comedy peers. So to cut it short, the rating system for cartoon shows is all kinds of messed up.